It is not mine." The words sliced through the oppressive silence of the library. They were quiet, yet they carried the force of a thunderclap, echoing off the leather-bound books and the cold marble hearth. Duke Alastair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, stood rigid, his face a mask of aristocratic steel. His gaze was fixed on the small, delicately carved cradle his wife had commissioned, a thing of pale ash wood and hopeful dreams that now seemed a grotesque mockery. Duchess Eleanor Beaumont felt the blood drain from her face, leaving a cold, prickling sensation in its wake. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on her until she could scarcely breathe. She clutched the high back of a wing chair, her knuckles white against the dark velvet. "Alastair, what are you saying?" Her voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous room. Outside, a miserable autumn rain lashed against the tall windows of their London townhouse, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass. The fire in the grate spat and hissed, a furious counterpoint to the frozen stillness that had fallen between them. He did not look at her. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, remained on the cradle. "I am saying that the child you carry is not mine. You will not pass off another man's bastard as the heir to Blackwood." The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly untethered from reality, that for a moment Eleanor felt nothing but a dizzying sense of disbelief. It was as if he had begun speaking in a foreign tongue. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar patterns of the Persian rug swirling into a nauseating vortex. "Another man's?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "There is no other man. There has never been anyone but you." Finally, he turned to face her. The cold fury in his eyes was a physical force, pushing her back. He was a handsome man, celebrated for his sharp profile and commanding presence. Now his features were contorted into something ugly, something she had never seen before. "Do not lie to me, Eleanor. Do not compound your treachery with insults to my intelligence." From the shadows near the doorway, a third figure shifted. Marcus Thorne, Alastair's cousin and confidant, stepped forward. His face was a study in feigned sympathy, his dark eyes glistening with a sorrow that did not reach their depths. "Alastair, perhaps this is a discussion for a more private moment." "This is my house. This is my library. There is no more private moment," Alastair snapped, his voice raw. He held up a sheaf of papers. "I have letters, Eleanor. Letters that speak of secret meetings, of shared affections, of a love you clearly do not feel for your husband." Eleanor stared at the papers in his hand. Her handwriting was not on them. She had never written such words. A cold dread, far worse than the initial shock, began to seep into her bones. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a fabrication, a deliberate, cruel attack. Her gaze flicked to Marcus, who met her eyes for a fleeting second. In that instant, she saw it. A flicker of triumph, quickly masked, but it was there. The architect of her ruin stood before her, cloaked in concern. "Those are not mine," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I have never seen them before. Alastair, you must believe me. This is a lie." "A lie?" Alastair's laugh was a harsh, bitter sound. "Am I to believe you or the evidence of my own eyes? Am I to believe you or the word of my own footman, who saw you slipping out to the gardens for these clandestine meetings?" The footman, James. A young man she had once admonished for stealing a bottle of wine from the cellar. A seed of resentment, carefully watered and nurtured by Marcus, had bloomed into this poisonous fruit. It all became clear with a sickening, horrifying certainty. She was trapped in a web not of her own making, and the spider was watching her struggle with detached amusement. "He is lying," she insisted, her desperation mounting. "Marcus, tell him. You know me. You know I would never do such a thing." Marcus placed a comforting hand on Alastair's arm. "Eleanor, I wish I could. I told Alistair it must be some mistake. But the letters, the footman's testimony, it is all very compelling." His voice was smooth, regretful, each word another nail in her coffin. She was drowning in it. The betrayal was absolute, coming not just from her husband, but from the man he trusted above all others. Alistair's pride, his unshakable belief in his own judgment and in his cousin's loyalty, formed a wall she could not possibly scale. He would not see the truth because he had already decided what it was. She was a prize bull being judged, and she had been found wanting. "I am your wife," she whispered, a last, desperate plea. "I carry your child, your heir." Alistair's face hardened into granite. "You are a duchess no longer. You will leave this house tonight. You will be given a small allowance and sent to a remote property on the coast. You will not speak of this to anyone. The world will be told you are unwell. You will live out your days in quiet disgrace. That is my final word." He turned his back on her, a gesture of dismissal more profound than any blow. The conversation was over. Her life, as she knew it, was over. The cold was absolute. It was not the chill of the rainy night, but a cold that originated from within, freezing her heart, her lungs, her very soul. She stood there for a long moment, watching the rigid line of her husband's back, the false comfort offered by his cousin. There was nothing left to say. No argument could penetrate a mind so thoroughly barricaded against the truth. She turned without another word and walked from the library. Her steps were steady, her back straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. She climbed the grand staircase, her hand trailing over the polished mahogany banister. Each step was a farewell. Farewell to the life she had tried so hard to build. Farewell to the man she had, in her own quiet way, begun to love. In her chambers, the fire was lit, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the room. Her lady's maid, startled by her early return, curtsied. Eleanor simply shook her head, unable to speak. She moved to her dressing table, its surface cluttered with silver-backed brushes and crystal perfume bottles. She looked at her reflection. The Duchess of Blackwood stared back, a pale, haunted stranger. She began to move with a strange, numb purpose. She shed her silk evening gown, letting it pool on the floor like a bruised flower. She ignored the expensive jewels in their velvet boxes. She ignored the rows of exquisite shoes and the closets full of gowns. They were part of a life that no longer belonged to her. They were the costume for a role she could no longer play. Instead, she pulled out a simple, dark wool traveling dress, the kind she had worn before her marriage. It felt solid, real. She packed a small valise with only the most practical items, a few changes of linen, a warm shawl, a sturdy pair of boots. She went to her writing desk and opened a small, locked drawer. Inside was the household money she managed, a modest sum in cash. She took all of it, her hands not even trembling. This was not theft. It was survival. Her eyes fell upon her knitting basket, sitting near the fire. Inside was a soft, half-finished blanket of sky-blue wool. She had been working on it for weeks, the repetitive motion of the needles a soothing balm to her lonely days. A blanket for her son, for their son. A wave of pain, so sharp and intense it almost brought her to her knees, washed over her. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the soft yarn. But then she stopped. She could not take it. It was a link to this house, to the man who had cast her out. It was a symbol of a dream that had just been murdered. Leaving it behind was an act of severance, a final, brutal cut. She left the room, the small valise in her hand. She did not use the grand staircase, but slipped down the narrow, winding stairs used by the servants. No one stopped her. No one saw her go. The house was already expelling her, forgetting her. She opened a side door and stepped out into the raw, weeping night. The rain soaked her hair and clothes in moments, but she barely felt it. She walked away from the grand townhouse, from the title, from the life that had been stolen from her, and did not look back. She had nothing left but the small, flickering life inside her, and a core of iron she never knew she possessed. 5 years passed. The salty wind of Porthgarrow was a constant companion. It scoured the granite cliffs, whipped the sea into a frenzy of white foam, and carried the scent of fish and brine through the narrow, cobbled streets. It was a harsh, cleansing wind, and Eleanor, who now called herself Ellen Gable, had come to love it. It had scoured away the last vestiges of the Duchess of Blackwood, leaving behind a woman she barely recognized, but one she deeply respected. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now chapped and calloused from mending fishing nets and scrubbing floors at the local inn. Her face was weathered by the sun and wind, fine lines etched around her eyes. She was thinner, stronger. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a steady, watchful calm. Her world had shrunk to the size of a small, whitewashed cottage, clinging to the cliffside, and the boundless energy of her son, Thomas. He was nearly 5, a whirlwind of boundless curiosity and startling solemnity. He had her dark hair, but his eyes were his father's, a clear, piercing gray, the color of a winter sky. Every time she looked into them, she felt a familiar ache, a ghost of a life that felt as distant as a dream. But the ache was no longer debilitating. It was simply a part of her, like a faded scar. Her days were a rhythm of hard work and simple joys. Waking before dawn to light the fire, the smell of wood smoke and baking bread filling their small home. Walking Thomas down to the village school, his small hand tucked firmly in hers. Long hours of darning and mending for the fisherman, her needle flying with practiced speed. Evenings spent reading to Thomas by the light of a single candle, his head heavy against her shoulder. She had found an unlikely ally and friend in Mrs. Gable, the stout, no-nonsense widow who owned the Mariner's Rest Inn. It was Mrs. Gable who had found her, soaked and exhausted on the road 5 years ago. It was Mrs. Gable who had asked no questions, offering a warm bed, a hot meal, and later a job and a name to hide behind. She had been a midwife in her younger days and had helped Eleanor bring Thomas into the world, her steady presence a rock in the storm of childbirth. "You've got a spine of steel, Ellen," Mrs. Gable had said once, watching her haggle with a merchant over the price of flour. "Whatever storm you ran from, it didn't break you. It tempered you." Eleanor knew it was true. She had been forged anew in this harsh, beautiful place. She had learned to be self-reliant, to depend on no one but herself and the kindness of a few trusted neighbors. She was poor, yes. Some days she was bone-weary, but she was free. The gilded cage of her former life, with its stifling rules and silent, suffocating loneliness, was a memory. Here she was simply Ellen, a mother, a worker, a survivor, and she was, for the most part, content. The past was a locked room, and she had long ago thrown away the key. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in the opulent silence of Blackwood Manor, Duke Alistair Beaumont was living in a different kind of prison. His was a prison of his own making, walled with regret and furnished with emptiness. The years since Eleanor's departure had been hollow. He had won. He had protected the Blackwood name from the stain of a bastard heir. He had excised the source of his humiliation. But the victory was as tasteless as ash. The great house, once merely quiet, was now tomb-silent. The echo of his own footsteps on the marble floors was a constant, mocking reminder of his solitude. Marcus Thorne was a frequent visitor, his presence a cloying, unwelcome perfume. He was always ready with a suggestion for a house party, a trip to the continent, a new horse for the stables. He encouraged Alistair to find a new wife, a more suitable duchess, but Alistair found he had no appetite for any of it. Society events seemed garish and loud, the simpering debutantes insipid. He saw deceit in every smile, calculation in every glance. The world Eleanor had been forced out of now seemed to him a shallow, treacherous sea. The first cracks in his certainty had appeared within a year of her leaving. The footman, James, was caught stealing silver and dismissed. In a drunken rage, he boasted in a local tavern of how he had been paid handsomely by Mr. Thorne to tell a simple lie about the Duchess. The story reached Alistair's ears, a disquieting whisper he tried to ignore. He wanted to believe it was the bitter ranting of a disgraced servant. But the seed of doubt had been planted. He began to watch Marcus more closely. He saw the subtle greed in his cousin's eyes when he looked at the Blackwood treasures. He heard the way Marcus spoke of the estate's management, as if it were already his own. He remembered the almost too perfect timing of the letters, the way Marcus had been there to stoke the fires of his rage and pride. The true catalyst, however, came on a bleak spring morning nearly 2 years after Eleanor was gone. He had ordered her rooms to be cleared, unable to bear walking past the closed door any longer. He stood by as the servants, their faces somber, packed away gowns and slippers into large trunks. And then one of the maids pulled a knitting basket from beside the cold fireplace. "What shall we do with this, Your Grace?" Alistair looked inside. There, nestled amongst balls of yarn, was a small, half-finished blanket. It was made of a soft, sky-blue wool. He lifted it. It was barely a quarter done, the wooden needles still stuck in the stitches, as if the knitter had been interrupted mid-row and intended to return at any moment. A baby blanket, for a son. The sight of it did what years of silent regret could not. It broke him. He felt a sudden, suffocating pressure in his chest, a pain so acute he could not breathe. This was not the work of a woman planning a clandestine affair. This was the work of a hopeful mother, his wife, a woman he had condemned and cast out without a trial, based on the word of a thief and papers he had been too enraged to examine properly. He took the blanket from the maid, his hands trembling. "Leave it," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "Leave everything. Get out." Alone in the room, surrounded by the ghost of his wife, Alistair sank into a chair, the soft wool clutched in his fist. He had been a fool, a proud, arrogant, blind fool. He had allowed his pride and his trust in the wrong man to destroy his life, his marriage, and his unborn child. The horror of his actions settled upon him, a leaden weight that he knew he would carry for the rest of his days. From that day forward, a quiet, cold resolve grew within him. He would find the truth, not to assuage his guilt, for he knew that was a fool's errand. He deserved to live with the consequences of his actions. He would do it for her, to understand the full scope of the injustice he had perpetrated. He began a secret investigation. He hired a discreet but ruthlessly efficient man from London, a former Bow Street runner, to find the footman James. He sent the letters Marcus had given him to an expert in antiquities, a man who could analyze paper and ink. He began to piece together Marcus's financial records, uncovering a string of gambling debts and desperate loans. It took years. The footman had gone to the Americas. The paper expert was meticulous and slow. The financial trail was deliberately tangled. But Alistair was patient. He was a duke. He had limitless resources and an infinite supply of time, for his life was otherwise empty. Finally, on a crisp autumn afternoon, 5 years after he had destroyed his own life, the last pieces fell into place. The investigator's report arrived, containing a sworn, signed confession from James, tracked down in Boston. He admitted everything. Marcus Thorne had paid him £200 to lie. The letters expert's report was even more damning. The ink was of a modern chemical composition, not the iron gall ink Eleanor used. The handwriting was a clever but imperfect forgery. The truth, in its cold, brutal clarity, was laid bare. Marcus had orchestrated the entire thing. He had likely hoped Alistair would divorce Eleanor, leaving the way clear for Marcus to be named heir, or at least to continue bleeding the estate dry. Alistair sat in his library, the same room where he had condemned his wife, and read the reports again and again. A rage, cold and pure, settled in his heart. It was not the hot, prideful anger of 5 years ago. This was the patient, deadly fury of a man who has seen the full depth of his own failure and the malevolence of his betrayer. His first instinct was to destroy Marcus, to ruin him publicly, to see him imprisoned. But that could wait. There was only one thing that mattered now. He had to find Eleanor. He did not know if she would ever forgive him. He did not deserve her forgiveness, but he had to find her. He had to tell her the truth. He had to lay the evidence of his stupidity and her innocence at her feet. And he had to see, just once, the child he had abandoned before it was even born, the child whose existence he had denied. His investigator had found no trace of her. The allowance he had set up had never been touched. She had vanished as completely as smoke. But Alistair remembered the name of the property he had sent her to, a remote, forgotten cottage on the Cornish coast, owned by the Blackwood estate. He had assumed she was there, living in quiet shame. The fact that she was not filled him with a new, sharper fear. Where had she gone? How had she survived? He packed a single bag himself, taking only sturdy, practical clothes. He placed the investigator's reports in a leather satchel, and at the last moment, he went to Eleanor's cold, silent room and retrieved the half-finished baby blanket. He folded it carefully and placed it in the satchel beside the damning evidence. It was his penance, a symbol of his sin and his only, flickering hope. He would go to Cornwall himself. He would start where she was supposed to have been, and he would not stop searching until he found her, or until he found her grave. The journey to Cornwall was punishing. The smooth roads near London gave way to rutted tracks that shook the carriage until Alistair's teeth ached. The rolling green hills of the home counties flattened into windswept moors, and then rose again into the stark, granite cliffs of the coast. He felt as though he were traveling back in time, to a wilder, more elemental world. He arrived at the cottage designated for Eleanor's exile late one afternoon. It was a miserable, derelict place, its roof sagging, its windows boarded up. A local farmer used it to store hay. It was clear no one had lived there for decades. The agent who managed the estate's distant properties had simply taken the money Alistair sent and reported that all was well. Another betrayal, small and petty compared to Marcus's, but it was another layer of rot in the foundations of his life. He did not despair. He felt a strange sense of relief. Eleanor had not accepted his charity. She had not meekly submitted to her fate. She had forged her own path. It was more than he could have hoped for. He established a base in the nearby town of Penzance, presenting himself not as a duke, but as a Mr. Beaumont, a historian researching local families. He began his search methodically, visiting every small village and fishing cove along the coast. He showed a miniature portrait of Eleanor, a small, perfect thing painted just after their wedding. He asked if anyone had seen this woman. For weeks, his search yielded nothing. The locals were polite but wary of outsiders. They shook their heads, their faces impassive. He began to fear the worst, that she had perished in that first winter, alone and penniless. The guilt was a physical thing, a constant weight in his gut. He arrived in Porthgarrow on a blustery afternoon. The village was tucked into a narrow cove, its stone cottages huddled together as if for warmth against the relentless wind. The air smelled of salt and wood smoke. Fishing boats with brightly painted hulls were pulled up on the shingle beach, their nets drying on the seawall. It felt ancient, enduring. He went to the only inn, the Mariner's Rest. A sturdy, gray-haired woman with sharp, intelligent eyes was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Good afternoon," Alistair said, his voice hoarse from the wind. "I'm looking for someone, a woman who may have come to this area about 5 years ago." He produced the miniature. "Have you ever seen her?" The woman, Mrs. Gable, looked at the portrait. Her expression did not change, but Alistair, now a student of subtle deceptions, saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, and something else. Protectiveness. "A pretty thing," she said, her voice non-committal. "Can't say that I have. Lots of folks pass through." Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. He was close. He knew it. She would have been in distress, alone, perhaps with child. Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed. And what business would a fine gentleman like you have with a woman in distress? She is my wife, Alistair said, the word feeling foreign and undeserved on his tongue. There was a terrible misunderstanding. I need to find her, to make things right. The innkeeper studied his face for a long time, her gaze unwavering. She seemed to be weighing his soul. Misunderstandings can be cruel things, she said at last, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. They can ruin lives. Some things, once broken, can't be mended. Before Alistair could reply, the door to the inn opened, and a small boy ran in, his cheeks red from the wind. He had a head of unruly dark curls and was clutching a wooden boat. "Mama said to fetch the bread, Nana Gable," the boy chirped, his voice bright and clear. Mrs. Gable's stern face melted into a smile. "Did she now, Thomas? And did you remember to wipe your boots?" The boy, Thomas, nodded vigorously. He turned then, and his eyes, wide with childish curiosity, met Alistair's. They were gray, the clear, piercing gray of a winter sky. The Beaumont eyes. The world stopped. The sounds of the inn, the crackle of the fire, the distant cry of gulls, all faded into a deafening roar in Alistair's ears. He could not breathe. He could not think. He could only stare at the small, perfect face of the son he had never known. His son. He was real. He was alive. He looked from the boy to Mrs. Gable, whose expression was now one of grim understanding. She knew. She had known from the moment he walked in. As if summoned, the inn door opened again. A woman stood there, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. She wore a simple dark dress and a worn shawl. Her hair was pulled back from a face that was thinner, weathered, but achingly familiar. "Thomas," she said, her voice low and steady. "I told you to wait for me." She stepped inside, and her eyes met Alistair's. It was Eleanor. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Eleanor's face, which had been softening with maternal concern, froze into a mask of disbelief, then shock, then a cold, hard anger that was more terrifying than any shouting. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale as marble. Alistair felt as if he had been punched in the gut. Seeing her was one thing. He had prepared himself for that. But seeing her like this, a stranger forged in hardship, her eyes filled with a weary strength and a deep, abiding hatred for him, was something for which he was not prepared at all. "Mama," Thomas said, sensing the sudden, terrible tension in the room. He ran to his mother's side, clutching her skirts. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her son's head, a gesture of pure, fierce protection. Her gaze did not leave Alistair's. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Eleanor, I—" He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Do not," she commanded, the word like a whip crack. "Do not come near us." He froze. The chasm between them was not just the few feet of wooden floorboards. It was 5 years of pain, hardship, and betrayal. It was a gulf he might never be able to cross. "I came to find you," he said, his voice strained. "I know the truth. About Marcus. About the letters. I have proof." A bitter, humorless smile touched her lips. "Proof? It took you 5 years to find proof? Or did it simply take you 5 years to grow tired of your solitude?" Her words were stones, each one striking him with brutal accuracy. "I was a fool," he admitted, his pride stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly truth. "Arrogant? Blind? I believed a lie because it was easier than trusting my own wife. There is no excuse for what I did. None." He gestured to the boy hiding behind her. "He is my son." It was not a question. It was a statement of dawning, agonizing fact. "He is my son," she corrected him, her voice like ice. "His name is Thomas. I raised him. I kept him safe. I worked until my hands bled to keep a roof over his head and food in his belly. You have no claim on him." The finality in her tone was like a door slamming shut in his face. He saw now the monumental task before him. It was not enough to present evidence and beg for forgiveness. He had to dismantle the fortress she had built around her heart, stone by painful stone. "I will not leave," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not until you have heard everything I have to say. Not until you have seen the proof for yourself." He reached into his satchel, his hands fumbling. He did not pull out the legal documents. Instead, his fingers found the soft wool of the baby blanket. He drew it out. It was creased from its long confinement, the sky-blue yarn a stark splash of color in the dim light of the inn. "You left this behind," he said softly. Eleanor's eyes fixed on the half-finished blanket. For the first time, a crack appeared in her icy composure. A wave of memory, sharp and painful, washed over her face. The quiet afternoon spent knitting, the hopeful dreams stitched into every row. A dream he had turned into a nightmare. She looked away, her jaw tight. Some things are best left unfinished. She took Thomas's hand. "Come, we are going home." She turned and walked out of the inn, her son trotting to keep up, leaving Alistair standing alone in the sudden silence. He was left with the damning reports, the unfinished blanket, and the chilling realization that finding her had been the easy part. The true penance was only just beginning. Alistair did not follow her. He knew she needed space, that any pursuit would only drive her further away. He took a room at the inn, ignoring Mrs. Gable's disapproving stare. He would not be driven off. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. He would stay. For the next week, he existed in a state of purgatory. He saw Eleanor from a distance, a fleeting figure in the village. She moved with a purpose he had never seen in her before, her head held high, acknowledging her neighbors with a quiet nod. She never once looked in his direction. It was as if he were a ghost, a phantom visible only to himself. He saw his son more often. Thomas played on the shingle beach with the other village children. His laughter carried on the wind. Alistair would watch from the seawall, his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. The boy was sturdy and bright, full of life. He was everything a father could hope for. And he was a stranger. Alistair was a spectator in his own son's life, a punishment more fitting than any he could have devised for himself. He knew words were not enough. He had to show her. He began with a simple act. The fence around her small cottage was in disrepair, a section of it collapsing from the constant assault of the wind. One morning, before dawn, Alistair went to the local carpenter, bought lumber and tools, and set about repairing it. He was not a man accustomed to manual labor. His hands, soft from a life of leisure, were soon blistered and raw. The work was slow, clumsy, but he persisted. He worked all day under the gray, indifferent sky, driven by a desperate need to do something, anything, tangible. Eleanor came home in the late afternoon, Thomas at her side. She stopped dead when she saw him, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. He was filthy, his fine clothes stained with sweat and dirt, his hands bleeding. He did not look at her. He hammered the last nail into place and tested the sturdiness of the new fence post. "It should hold against the winter gales now," he said, his voice rough. She said nothing. She simply stared at the repaired fence, then at him, her expression unreadable. She ushered Thomas inside the cottage without a word, but as he walked away, back toward the inn, Alistair felt, for the first time, that he had made a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the wall between them. He continued his campaign of small, silent services. He noticed her supply of firewood was low, and he spent the next day chopping and stacking a cord of wood against the side of her cottage. He saw that the path to her door was treacherous with loose stones, and he spent an afternoon resetting them, creating a safe, even walkway. He did not speak to her. He did not ask for thanks. He simply did the work. The villagers watched him with curiosity. This strange, sad gentleman who had appeared in their midst, performing the work of a common laborer. Mrs. Gable watched him most closely of all. One evening, as he sat alone in the inn's common room, nursing a glass of ale and the ache in his muscles, she brought him a bowl of stew. "You're a stubborn man, Your Grace," she said, her use of his title a quiet acknowledgment. "I have to be," he replied, not looking up from the table. "She is stubborn, too," Mrs. Gable continued. "That is how she survived. You cannot expect her to simply forget 5 years of hardship because you fix her fence." "I expect nothing," Alistair said. "I deserve nothing." "Good," the innkeeper said with a firm nod. "That is the first sensible thing you have said since you arrived." She hesitated, then added, "The boy asks about you. He wants to know who the sad man is." Alistair's head snapped up, his heart lurching. "What does she tell him?" "She tells him you are a visitor to the village, nothing more." It was a small mercy, but it felt like a gift. She had not poisoned their son against him. The turning point came a few days later. Alistair was walking along the cliff path, the leather satchel containing the evidence heavy in his hand. He had decided he could wait no longer. He had to make her listen. He saw her ahead, gathering herbs from the cliffside, her basket on her arm. He approached her slowly, cautiously, as one might approach a startled deer. "Eleanor?" She straightened, her back rigid. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen," he pleaded. "That is all I ask. 5 minutes. Let me show you what I have found." He opened the satchel and took out the reports. He laid them out on a flat rock, weighting them down against the wind. "This is the confession from the footman, James. He admits Marcus paid him to lie. This is the analysis of the letters. It proves they are forgeries. The paper, the ink, the handwriting. It is all there." She stared at the documents, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the deep ingrained distrust warring with a flicker of pained curiosity. "Why should I believe any of this?" she asked, her voice thin. "This could be just another, more elaborate lie." "Because you know it is the truth," he said softly. "Deep down, you have always known you were innocent. This is just the proof of it." He watched as she hesitantly reached out and picked up the footman's confession. Her eyes scanned the page, her expression tightening. He saw the moment she understood, the moment the scale of the betrayal, the sheer, calculated malice of it, truly hit her. Her face went pale and she swayed slightly. He reached out to steady her, but she flinched away from his touch. "He was your cousin," she whispered, her voice filled with a horrified disbelief. "Your friend." "He wanted my title," Alistair said, his own voice grim. "He wanted my fortune. He was willing to destroy you, me, our child, to get it." The wind whipped a strand of dark hair across her face. She looked out at the churning sea, her gaze distant. "And you believed him?" It was not an accusation. It was a simple, devastating statement of fact. "Yes," Alistair said, the word costing him everything. "I did. My pride was a weapon, and he knew exactly how to aim it. I did not want to see the truth, so I did not. That failing is mine and mine alone." He waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the cry of the gulls and the crashing of the waves below. He had laid his soul bare. He had given her the truth. The rest was up to her. Finally, she looked at him. The hard anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. "What do you want from me, Alistair?" "I want—" He faltered. What did he want? Forgiveness? A second chance? It felt too much to ask. "I want to know my son," he said at last, the simple, honest truth. "I want to undo the damage I have done. I want to clear your name. I have already set the wheels in motion to ruin Marcus. He will lose everything. He will be a pariah." She was quiet for a long time. "Clearing my name means returning to that world," she said. "The world of whispers and judgments. I have found a sort of peace here." "I would not force you to go back," he said quickly. "We could stay here. I would give up the title, everything. We could live in this cottage, and I would spend the rest of my life fixing fences if it meant I could be with you and our son." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw not the arrogant duke who had condemned her, but a broken, humbled man. A man willing to trade a dukedom for a chance at redemption. "Thomas deserves to know who he is," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "He is the heir to Blackwood. It is his birthright. I will not let Marcus's evil steal that from him." It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. It was the first stone removed from the wall. A fragile truce settled between them in the following days. Eleanor allowed Alistair to spend time with Thomas, always under her watchful eye. The first meetings were awkward. Alistair, who had commanded men in Parliament and managed vast estates, was completely at a loss with his own 5-year-old son. He tried to impress him with gifts bought from Penzance, a fancy toy soldier, a book with colored plates. Thomas was polite but uninterested. He preferred his simple wooden boat and the smooth, gray stones he collected from the beach. Alistair realized his mistake. He was trying to be a duke to a boy who did not know what a duke was. So he stopped trying. He simply sat on the beach and watched Thomas play. One afternoon, the boy's boat got caught in a rock pool just out of his reach. Without thinking, Alistair waded into the cold seawater, his boots and trousers soaked, and retrieved it for him. He handed the boat back to Thomas. The boy looked at his wet clothes, then up at his face, and a slow, shy smile spread across his lips. "Thank you," he said. It was a small moment, but for Alistair, it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. He sat with Thomas on the sand, and the boy began to talk, a stream of childish chatter about seagulls and crabs and the shapes of the clouds. Alistair listened, truly listened, for the first time in his life. He learned that his son was brave and funny and saw the world with a startling clarity. He was a miracle, and Alistair had almost thrown him away. That evening, Eleanor invited him into the cottage for supper. It was a simple meal of fish stew and fresh bread. The cottage was small and sparsely furnished, but it was filled with a warmth that Blackwood Manor had never known. They ate in a comfortable silence, with Thomas providing a steady stream of commentary. After the boy was asleep in his small bed in the corner, Eleanor and Alistair sat by the fire. She was mending one of Thomas's shirts, her needle moving with a familiar, rhythmic grace. "He likes you," she said quietly. "I do not know why," Alistair confessed. "I have done nothing to earn it." "You fetched his boat," she replied with a small smile. "In his world, that is a heroic act." She looked at the fire, her expression thoughtful. "He needs a father, Alistair. I have tried to be enough for him, but there are things a mother cannot be." The admission hung in the air between them. It was an offering, a gesture of trust. Alistair reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the half-finished baby blanket. He had carried it with him every day. He held it out to her. "I think," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it is time this was finished." Eleanor looked at the soft blue wool, then at him. She saw the deep, genuine remorse in his eyes. She saw the love for their son that had taken root in his broken heart. She saw the man he could have been, the man he was trying so hard to become. She put down her mending and took the blanket from him. Her fingers brushed against his, and for the first time, she did not pull away. "Yes," she whispered. "I think it is." Their return to Blackwood Manor was not the triumphant restoration Alistair had once envisioned. It was a quiet, deliberate reclamation. They traveled not as a duke and his disgraced duchess, but as a family. The news of Marcus Thorne's ruin had preceded them. Faced with irrefutable proof of fraud and conspiracy, his creditors had descended like wolves. Society, which had once lauded him, now shunned him completely. He fled to the continent, a broken man, his name a synonym for treachery. Alistair felt no satisfaction in his cousin's downfall, only a grim sense of justice done. Eleanor's name was cleared. The story, carefully managed by Alistair's solicitors, was one of a duchess who had retired to the country for her health after being subjected to a cruel deception by a jealous relative. Society, always eager for a dramatic tale, accepted it without question. But for Eleanor, the opinions of that world no longer mattered. As she stepped out of the carriage and looked up at the grand, imposing facade of Blackwood Manor, she felt no fear, no echo of her past pain. It was just a house, a collection of stone and glass. Her home was not a place. It was the two people standing beside her. The staff, who had loved their quiet, kind duchess, welcomed her back with genuine warmth. They doted on Thomas, who explored the vast house and sprawling gardens with wide-eyed wonder, his laughter echoing in rooms that had been silent for far too long. Life at Blackwood settled into a new rhythm, one dictated not by social calendars and formal dinners, but by the simple routines of a family. Alistair abandoned his London townhouse and his parliamentary duties, focusing his entire attention on his estate and his son. He taught Thomas to ride, to fish in the estate's river, to know the name of every tree in the ancient woods. He was not just making up for lost time. He was building a foundation, moment by precious moment. Eleanor, for her part, transformed the house. She threw open windows that had been shuttered for years, letting in sunlight and fresh air. She filled the cold, formal rooms with flowers from the garden. She turned the oppressive library where her life had been shattered into a comfortable family room, filled with Thomas's toys and books. She was no longer a guest in her own home. She was its heart. Their reconciliation was not a single, dramatic event. It was a slow, quiet process, built on small acts of trust and shared moments of joy. It was Alistair rising early to have breakfast with his son. It was Eleanor seeking Alistair's opinion on the estate school she wanted to fund for the tenants' children. It was the two of them sitting by the fire in the evening, not in stiff silence, but in a comfortable companionship, reading or talking softly. He was courting her again, not with jewels or grand gestures, but with patience, respect, and unwavering devotion. He learned to listen, to see the incredible strength and intelligence he had been blind to before. He fell in love not with the duchess he had married, but with the resilient, remarkable woman she had become. One cool autumn evening, a year after their return, Eleanor sat in a comfortable chair by the library fire. In her lap was a knitting basket. She pulled out a small, soft blanket of sky-blue wool, now nearly complete. Only a few rows remained. Alistair came into the room and saw what she was doing. He knelt beside her chair, his hand resting gently on her arm. He said nothing, but his eyes were filled with a love and gratitude that went beyond words. She looked up at him, her own eyes shining. "I think it is almost finished," she said softly. "It is beautiful," he whispered. "It is for our next child," she said, a quiet statement of fact and future. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. He looked at her, at the gentle curve of her stomach that he had only just begun to notice, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over him. A second chance. A new beginning, built not on duty and title, but on earned forgiveness and a love that had been tested in the fiercest of fires. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held all the pain of the past and all the hope of the future. The house was quiet, the fire crackled warmly, and their son slept peacefully upstairs. The blanket lay in her lap, a symbol not of what was lost, but of everything that had been found. Their life, once broken and unfinished, was finally beautifully whole,